Hi there, Daily Gardeners. Jennifer here. I just wanted to let you know really quick that I'm going to be taking spring break next week. My kids are home from school next week, and so I'll be taking the week off too. So we'll see you on the 21st. Have a great week. Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is March 11th. Today in garden history, we celebrate the birthday of Pierre Turpin, the French botanist and illustrator. He was born on this day, March 11th, in 1775. Pierre was friends with the botanist, gardener, and botanical artist Pierre Poitou, and although we know that he learned a great deal about botany from his friend Poitou, Pierre was actually self-taught when it came to his botanical illustrations, and Rodut's work was a clear influence on him. Pierre created over 6,000 magnificent botanical watercolors, and he was a special expert on fruit trees, and his fruit prints are considered to be some of the very best in the world. And there are two little stories about Pierre that I wanted to share with you today. The first is that Pierre created a fictional plant for the German poet Goethe. It was an amalgam of different angiosperms. Goethe essentially wanted an illustration to show the diversity of angiosperms, and when he saw Pierre's drawing, he named the plant the Urplant. Goethe wrote that the Urplant would be the most wondrous creation in the world. And if you can imagine a plant that essentially has a bunch of different flowering plants on it, well, that is the Urplant. It's a little plant mashup. Now, the second story that I wanted to share with you about Pierre is actually about his son, Pierre Jr. No doubt, Pierre taught his son how to draw because he was also a botanical artist. But tragically, Pierre Jr. died young, and his final drawing was of an amaryllis. After his death, Pierre made sure that his son got credit for that drawing, and then he did something a little unusual for botanical illustrations, which are usually to the point when it comes to their descriptions. But in this case, Pierre made a little personal remark on his son's passing, and he wrote these words to describe his son's final drawing of this amaryllis. He wrote, "This original illustration was painted by Pierre John Frederick Eugene Turpin, the illustrator, who was 18 years and 6 days of age, ceased to live on the 21st of August in 1821. So poignant. Pierre himself would die in Paris in 1840, less than 2 decades later, at the age of 65. Now, speaking of amaryllis, this is the time of year when gardeners get all kinds of questions about them. My neighbor Jan up at the cabin returned from a trip to Las Vegas to find her Christmas gift, an amaryllis, in full bloom, and she's utterly captivated by this gorgeous amaryllis. But of course she called me to say, what do I do with it after it's done blooming? And this is the question that's on everybody's mind because they're wrapping things up about now. So what are your options if you have an amaryllis? Well, number one, you can throw it away. You can be done with it if you choose to. You could put it in the compost pile and so forth. Or if you're committed to try to get your amaryllis to bloom again next year, it is possible to do. You can force it to flower again next year. What you're going to do is you're going to keep it on a sunny window inside until June when things warm up, and then harden it off the way you would any of your houseplants that you bring outside. Take it outside for a few hours and then bring it back in. Gradually increase the amount of time that it stays outside until it's outside all day. Make sure that it's in a sunny spot. And then in the fall, you can bring it back indoors. And this is when you're going to impose dormancy. And what you'll do is you can put it in a cold area. Maybe if you have a dark cellar, that would be ideal. And remember that during dormancy, you don't want to water your amaryllis. Just think about it like a little sleeping beauty that you'll wake up in time for the holidays. And then at that point, you can resume watering and your amaryllis, with any luck, will flower again. So there you go, a little Amaryllis Care 101, inspired by the son of Pierre Turpin. All right, and today is also the birth of Katherine Sophia Kane, the Irish botanist and horticulturist. She was born on this day, March 11th, in 1811. Kate was orphaned as a little girl, and she was raised by her uncle, who fostered her love of the outdoors and ultimately her focus on botany. When she was 22, Kate anonymously published a book that became the very first National Flora of Ireland. And this book was so accurate and informative that it became a textbook for botany students at Trinity College in Dublin. 3 years later, in recognition of her work, Kate became the first woman to be elected to the Botanical Society of Edinburgh. Now, the story of how Kate met her husband Robert always reminds me of how John Claudius Loudon, the garden writer, met his wife Jane Webb, and it's through their books. In Kate's case, proofs of her book, The Irish Flora, mistakenly or divinely landed on Robert's desk. Robert gallantly then tracked down Kate's address, and he personally returned the proofs to her. And the rest, as they say, was history. Kate and Robert were married in 1838, and they went on to have 10 children. But their story doesn't end there. In 1846, nearly a decade after they were married, Robert was knighted, and Kate became known as Lady Kane. Robert was an economist, a chemist, and a scientist, and he was hired to serve as the president of Queen's College, a great honor. And although Kate was happy for her husband, she refused to move to Cork because that would mean that she would have to leave her magnificent garden, and she had planted so many amazing exotics around their home in Dublin that she just couldn't bear to leave it. And so, much to the school's dismay, Robert commuted to work until finally the college insisted that he live in Cork during the school year. And so they ended up moving to Cork. Kate finally relented, and they actually made their home there. But there is also one other little fun side note about Kate and Robert. Since they were both scientists, Kate and Robert would send notes to each other in Greek. Very sweet. And today is also the birthday of the Australian botanist Jean White-Haney. She was born on this day, March 11th, in 1877. In 1912, as a young botanist, Jean was asked to deal with the non-native prickly pear problem in Australia. The plant had been introduced to Australia 100 years earlier, and it had become invasive once it was established. Now, tackling the prickly pear problem was a massive undertaking, as you might imagine. And Jean's appointment marked the first time that a woman was holding a scientific leadership position in the Australian government. So this was a very big job for Jean, and she knew that she would have to power through the hardships of this assignment in order to prove herself. And she once reflected on the experience by saying this. She wrote, "I lived in the midst of the thickest pear. It was a desolate little place where living was primitive. But I insisted on not being given any special privileges because of being a woman. I lived in the little public house there, and I worked on my fascinating job with all the enthusiasm of those who see small beginnings to great ends. And then she goes on to say that how she dealt with the prickly pear was through insects and poison. Now, many gardeners are surprised to learn that prickly pear is actually an excellent pollinator plant. In fact, Charles Darwin noticed this when he observed that the flowers of the prickly pear have thigmotactic anthers. Now, that means that the anthers curl over and drop their pollen when touched. And as you can imagine, the bees love it. It's like a little shower of pollen for them. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Life in a French Country House by Cordelia du Catalan. This book came out in 2020, and the subtitle is Simple Ideas for Small Outdoor Spaces. Well, Cordelia is beloved in France. She's a consummate host and the artistic director of Dior Home and Baby Dior. This book is divided into 4 seasons. It's one of my favorite ways to organize a book, and it covers all the basics like at-home entertaining and decor and flowers and so on. And Cordelia shares her tips and secrets to imbuing your home with style and flowers. And when I was looking at Cordelia's book, I ran across an Architectural Digest review of her book, and they highlighted Cordelia's 5 things that she thinks every home needs. So here's her list, and it is so Cordelia. It is so unique. And so her 5 things for the home are meaningful objects, books. Cordelia loves books. Flowers, of course, and then scent or fragrance, because to Cordelia, fragrance is so interwoven with our feeling of home. And then finally, children. Of course, children add life to any home. Now, if you love French country and you want to know how to recreate that look in your own home and garden, well, you can't go wrong with Cordelia's guidance. Cordelia even includes some of her favorite recipes, her tips about flower arranging. She's a master at that. And of course, table setting tips. I'm going to have my kids reread that section. This book is 240 pages of French chic combined with Cordelia's eclectic but elegant vibe that has been refined to perfection over the past 3 decades. You can get a copy of Life in a French Country House by Cordelia du Catalan and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $34. Finally, we end today's show with a botanic spark that celebrates the birthday of Douglas Noel Adams. He was the English writer, satirist, and dramatist, and he was born on this day, March 11th, in 1952. Douglas is remembered for his radio comedy, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which became a trilogy of 5 books. Douglas was an environmentalist and a conservationist, and in his book, Last Chance to See, Douglas wrote, "As zoologists and botanists explore new areas, scrabbling to record the mere existence of species before they become extinct, it's like someone hurrying through a burning library, desperately trying to jot down some of the titles of books that will now never be read." And in Richard Dawkins' bestseller, The God Delusion, his dedication was to Douglas Adams in memoriam, and it included this poignant quote by Douglas, who was an atheist. "Isn't it enough to see that a garden is beautiful without having to believe that there are fairies at the bottom of it too?" Finally, in Douglas's book, Life, the Universe, and Everything, that came out in 1982, one of his characters, Arthur Dent's old friend, Ford Prefect, says, I decided I was a lemon for a couple of weeks. I kept myself amused all that time, jumping in and out of a gin and tonic. I found a small lake that I thought was a gin and tonic and jumped in and out of that. At least, I think it thought it was a gin and tonic. Well, that's it for today's show. Just remember that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. Hi there, Daily Gardeners. I just wanted to let you know that I will be speaking at the Friends of the State Botanical Garden of Georgia annual meeting in Athens, Georgia on March 25th at 7 p.m. And there's a reception before this event at 6:30. Anyway, this is their 50th anniversary, and I'll be giving a presentation on some of the women who influenced botanical illustration and who created marvelous botanical porcelain art, which is now truly a dying art. In fact, in the United States, there are no longer any porcelain studios in operation. All of the beam studios have closed. And so these pieces are only going to become more scarce and more precious over time. Now, in Athens, there is a brand new porcelain and decorative arts museum at the Center for Art and Nature, and it's right next to the Visitor Center at the Botanical Garden of Georgia. This porcelain and decorative arts museum houses the collection of Dean Day Sanders, a passionate gardener and art collector with an extensive concentration in botanical porcelain. And so this museum is special because it's the first of its kind to integrate decorative arts in a garden setting to celebrate nature. Now, if you decide that you'd like to be at this event, all you need to do is check today's show notes or the Facebook group, the Daily Gardener Community over at Facebook, or the newsletter, because I'll put links to this event in all of those places. And if you do register, let me know, because it would be fun to have some Daily Gardeners in the audience. I'm going to have a little bit of free time, and it would be great to connect with you. We could tour the gardens together, have a little meet and greet, grab a coffee, etc. Anyway, it would be great to get to see you there. We'll celebrate these wonderful botanical artists, see the beautiful botanical porcelain, and get a chance to hang out. What could be better? So one more time, the meeting is on March 25th on a Friday at 7 p.m. Hope to see you there.